I need her gone before the winter solstice." David's voice drifted through the crack in the heavy oak doors, cold and terrifyingly calm. "The council requires a pure-blood Luna, not a fragile liability. Once the Northern Treaty is signed, I'll strip her of the mark." Lisa froze. The porcelain tea tray rattled violently against her trembling hands, the fine china chiming like a death knell. 3 years of absolute devotion. 3 years of enduring the political venom and agonizing rituals to bind herself to his ruthless world, reduced to a calculated, cruel promise. A sob clawed at her chest, but she swallowed it down like crushed glass. She wouldn't let him strip her of her dignity. If she was a liability, she would be a ghost. She had to vanish before dawn. The heavy oak doors of the king's study felt like a physical weight pressing against Lisa's chest. For 3 seconds, she stood entirely paralyzed. The faint scent of David's sandalwood and petrichor cologne drifting into the hallway, mingling with the bitter, metallic tang of the elder councilman he was speaking to. A fragile liability, the words echoed in her skull, drowning out the faint, pulsating bass of the charity gala happening 3 floors below in the estate's grand ballroom. Lisa's knuckles turned bone white as she gripped the edges of the silver tray. If she dropped it, the crash would alert David. His heightened alpha hearing would catch the spike in her heart rate in an instant, drawing on a reservoir of survival instinct she hadn't needed since before she met him. Lisa forced her breathing to slow. Inhale for 4 seconds. Hold for 4. Exhale for 4. She took a deliberate step backward, the thick Persian runners swallowing the sound of her heels. Another step, and then another. When she rounded the corner into the east wing, the facade finally cracked. Lisa leaned heavily against the cold marble wall, sliding down until her knees hit the floor. She set the tray down with a trembling hand. The chamomile tea, his favorite, brewed exactly at 180 degrees to ease his tension, sloshing over the brim and staining the immaculate floorboards. She pressed the heel of her palm against her chest, right over the faint, silvery scar where his canine had broken her skin during the mating ceremony. It didn't burn. It just felt sickeningly numb. For years, David had been her impenetrable shield. When the pure-blood elites scoffed at her latent, untriggered wolf blood, David had silenced entire rooms with a single, dangerous glare. "She is my center," he had told the assembly on the night of his coronation, his hand resting possessively on the small of her back. "Disrespect her, and you challenge the crown." Had it all been a performance? A necessary delay while he consolidated his power? Lisa pushed herself off the floor, her vision blurring, but she blinked the tears away with fierce, sudden anger. No. She refused to play the weeping, discarded mate. She refused to be dragged before the council in a month's time, stripped of her title and tossed aside like collateral damage while David secured a pure-blood bride from the northern territories. The estate was a fortress. The Alpha King's penthouse spanned the entire top floor, secured by a military-grade biometric system and patrolled by elite Lycan guards whose senses were sharper than radar. But Lisa was the Luna. For now, she walked down the long, shadowed corridor toward their shared master suite. The silence of the penthouse was usually a comfort, a sanctuary from the crushing demands of pack politics. Tonight, it felt like a tomb. She passed the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the glittering skyline of the city. Rain had begun to fall, smearing the neon lights into streaks of bleeding color. Entering the bedroom, Lisa didn't turn on the main lights. She moved through the darkness with practiced precision. The massive, king-sized bed, rumpled from their shared warmth just hours ago, sat in the center of the room. She averted her eyes. Logic had to govern her now. Emotion would only get her caught. She walked into her expansive walk-in closet, bypassing the silk evening gowns and diamond parures that belonged to the Alpha King's mate. Instead, she knelt in the far corner, pressing her thumb against a concealed panel in the cedar floorboards. A quiet click echoed in the silence. From the hidden safe, Lisa pulled out a sleek, waterproof duffel bag. Inside lay the artifacts of a girl who had always known, deep down, that a fairy tale in a world of wolves was a dangerous illusion. $50,000 in untraceable cash, 3 burner phones, and a flawlessly forged passport under the name Elena Rostova. As she zipped the bag closed, her gaze drifted to the vanity mirror. Her reflection was barely visible in the ambient city light. A pale face, dark hair falling out of its elegant updo, and eyes that had lost their naive warmth. She reached up and unclasped the heavy, platinum mating collar from her neck. It dropped onto the glass vanity with a heavy, final thud. The fracture in her heart was complete. Now she just had to disappear. The rain had intensified into a torrential downpour, hammering against the reinforced glass of the penthouse. It was a blessing. Heavy rain masked scents and muffled sounds, turning the city into a chaotic, sensory-dulling blur even for the most elite guards. Lisa changed rapidly into black tactical cargo pants, a thermal long sleeve, and a waterproof windbreaker. She tied her hair back into a tight, unforgiving braid. Every movement was efficient, stripped of the grace she usually projected at royal functions. She checked her smartwatch. 11:42 p.m. The gala downstairs would conclude in 20 minutes, followed by David's mandatory security debriefing in the war room. She had a narrow 45-minute window before he returned to the penthouse and realized the bed was empty. Bag slung over her shoulder, Lisa stepped out of the bedroom. She didn't look back. The primary elevators were out of the question. They required a retinal scan that logged every entry and exit directly to the Beta's security mainframe. The service elevators were monitored by thermal cameras. However, during the estate's renovation 2 years ago, a project Lisa had overseen while David was at war on the Western Front, she had insisted on a pressurized, analog emergency chute leading directly to the underground utility tunnels. David had called it paranoia. She had called it prudence. She moved silently toward the laundry quarters. The air in the penthouse felt thick, almost vibrating with the latent energy of the Alpha King still in the building. Lisa could feel the faint, magnetic pull of the mating bond in her chest, urging her to seek him out, to demand an explanation, to beg. She violently shoved the instinct down. Reaching the utility room, she pulled back a heavy linen cart, revealing a reinforced steel hatch. Lisa punched a manual override code into the keypad, a code she had buried in the system architecture under a dummy maintenance file. The light blinked green. She hoisted herself into the dark, narrow chute, the cold metal biting through her clothes. As she slid down, descending 300 feet into the bowels of the estate, the darkness swallowed her whole. It felt like falling out of a dream and hitting cold, hard reality. She landed quietly on a foam dampener in the subterranean utility matrix. The air here smelled of ozone, damp concrete, and engine oil. Lisa scrambled to her feet, adjusting the strap of her duffel. She was now beneath the perimeter wards, but not past the physical gate. Navigating the labyrinth of steam pipes and electrical conduits, Lisa relied on a mental blueprint. She walked for 10 minutes until she reached a grated exhaust vent overlooking the lower parking garage. Through the slats, she saw 2 Lycan guards leaning against a black SUV, smoking. Their posture was relaxed, assuming no threat could breach the king's sanctum from within. "Did you hear about the northern delegation?" One guard muttered, his voice carrying easily through the cavernous space. Yeah. The king's clearing the board. Looks like the human experiment is over. Lisa's stomach twisted, a sickening confirmation of what she had overheard. It wasn't just a private plan. It was an open secret among his inner circle. The humiliation burned hot in her veins, burning away the last lingering threads of hesitation. She waited until the guards turned their backs to flick their cigarettes. Then she slipped the grate open, dropping silently into the shadows of a concrete pillar. She kept low, using the line of armored luxury vehicles as cover, weaving toward the subterranean exit ramp. The biometric gate at the ramp was the final hurdle. It required a physical thumbprint. A registered print would open the gate, but instantly alert the control room. Lisa pulled a small, clear silicone mold from her pocket. Months ago, she had playfully taken an impression of David's thumb using dental alginate during a crafting session with the pack pups, laughing that she was going to use it to steal his private stash of scotch. He had kissed her, eyes full of warmth, and told her what was his was hers. Her chest ached sharply. She pressed the silicone mold against the scanner. Baby. The massive steel shutters rolled upward with a low, mechanical grind. Lisa didn't wait for them to open fully. She slipped under the rising gate, sprinting out into the torrential rain of the city streets. The frigid downpour instantly soaked her to the bone, washing away the scent of sandalwood, petrichor, and shattered promises. By the time the gate closed behind her, Lisa was gone. David woke abruptly, a visceral, icy jolt ripping through his nervous system before his eyes even opened. The bedroom was pitch black, silent save for the rhythmic drumming of rain against the glass. He reached out blindly across the massive mattress. His hand met cold, unwrinkled silk sheets. Instantly, his eyes snapped open, glowing a faint, dangerous amber in the darkness. Lisa! His voice was rough with sleep, vibrating with a low timbre that commanded the shadows themselves. Silence answered him. A spike of primal anxiety hit his chest. As the Alpha King, his senses were tuned to a supernatural frequency. He should be able to hear the steady, soothing rhythm of her heartbeat anywhere in the penthouse. He should be able to smell the warm vanilla and rain scent that naturally radiated from her skin. He closed his eyes, extending his awareness outward. Nothing. There was a terrifying void where her presence should be. Throwing off the heavy duvet, David moved with predatory speed. He hit the light switch, flooding the master suite with harsh illumination. The room was immaculate. Too immaculate. Lisa! He barked, the command laced with enough alpha dominance to rattle the glass of the windows. He strode into the ensuite bathroom. Empty. He pushed open the doors to her expansive walk-in closet. Her gowns hung in perfect, undisturbed rows. Her shoes were aligned flawlessly. But as his eyes swept the space, they snagged on something violently out of place. On the glass vanity, catching the glare of the overhead lights, sat the heavy platinum mating collar. David stopped dead. The air in his lungs vanished. He stared at the metal loop, his mind struggling to process the visual data. The collar wasn't just jewelry. It was a symbol of his protection, a beacon that told the entire supernatural world she belonged to the king. A mate never removed it unless they were severing the tie. A low, guttural growl ripped from his throat, completely involuntary. It was the sound of a beast recognizing a fatal wound. He lunged forward, snatching the collar from the glass. It was ice cold. She had been gone for hours. "Marcus!" David roared, not bothering with a comms device, knowing his beta was stationed 2 floors down. Within seconds, the penthouse doors burst open. Marcus, a towering brute of a lichen with battle-scarred features, rushed into the suite, his gun drawn, eyes scanning for a threat. "Sire, we have a breach. Where is she?" David's voice was dangerously quiet now. A deadly calm that Marcus knew was infinitely worse than shouting. The king's eyes were blazing a brilliant, terrifying gold. Marcus lowered his weapon, confused. "The Luna," She retired to the suite after the gala began, sire. Security logs show she never left the floor. The logs are lying. David stepped out of the closet, his massive frame vibrating with barely contained violence. He threw the platinum collar at Marcus. The beta caught it, his eyes widening in shock. "Lock down the estate," David commanded, striding toward his tactical wardrobe to pull on a shirt and boots. "Lock down the city. Ground all flights out of the territory. I want every tracker in the Royal Guard on the streets 5 minutes ago." "David, wait." Marcus stepped forward, dropping the formalities in the face of disaster. If she bypassed the system, she planned this. Why would she run? Everything was fine yesterday. David froze, his hands gripping the edges of his dresser so hard the mahogany began to splinter under his fingers. Why would she run? His mind raced backward, analyzing the last 24 hours. The gala, the council meeting, the private debriefing in his study with Elder Thorne. I need her gone before the winter solstice. I'll strip her of the mark. A wave of nausea so profound it almost dropped him to his knees washed over David. He remembered the faint sound of rattling china outside his door. He had assumed it was a clumsy servant and dismissed it, too focused on selling his lie to the elder. He had been playing a dangerous political game. The Northern purebloods were planning an assassination attempt on Lisa, viewing her human bloodline as an insult to the crown. To protect her, David had orchestrated a complex ruse to fake her banishment, intending to secretly move her to a heavily guarded sanctuary until he could slaughter the Northern conspirators. He hadn't told her because he needed her public reaction to be genuine, to sell the deception to the council's spies. He had intended to explain everything to her tonight, in the safety of their bed. "Gods," David whispered, the words sounding like a broken prayer. He looked at Marcus, the terrifying majesty of the Alpha King cracking to reveal a man entirely destroyed. "She heard me. She thinks I betrayed her." "We will find her, sire," Marcus said grimly. "If she believes I'm hunting her to strip her of her title." David's voice turned hollow. "She will go deep underground, and she knows all our tactics." He looked out the window at the raging storm, the rain washing away any hope of a scent trail. "I haven't just lost my mate, Marcus. I've turned her into my enemy." Chapter 4. The Underground. The city of Oakhaven was a sprawling metropolis where the supernatural and the mundane bled into one another, separated only by ancient treaties and silent agreements. To the humans, it was a tech hub battered by coastal storms. To the lichen purebloods, it was territory. Lisa moved through the subterranean train system like a ghost. Her clothes were still damp, clinging uncomfortably to her skin, but she ignored the chill. Every shadow held a potential threat. Every passing face could be an informant for the crown. She had abandoned the forged passport an hour ago, shoving it deep into a hazardous waste bin outside a late-night diner. It was a decoy. She knew David's tracker units, the elite hounds of the Royal Guard, would find it. They would assume Elena Rostova was her alias and burn resources monitoring the borders and airports. She wasn't trying to leave the city. The most dangerous place was sometimes the safest. She was going into the Warrens. The Warrens were a lawless sector beneath the city's old industrial district, a haven for exiled shifters, rogue vampires, and humans who preferred to operate in the dark. It was the only place David's authority held no absolute weight. Lisa descended a rusted iron staircase leading into an abandoned subway terminal. The air here was heavy with the smell of cheap alcohol, unwashed bodies, and raw magic. A few wary eyes tracked her progress as she moved through the dim, flickering light. But her purposeful stride and tactical gear suggested she wasn't easy prey. She stopped in front of a heavy steel door marked only with a faded, jagged crescent moon. Taking a steadying breath, she knocked 3 times, paused, then knocked twice more. A rusted panel slid open, revealing a pair of glowing green eyes. "Who's asking?" a raspy voice demanded. "A ghost who needs a grave," Lisa replied, reciting the old underground passkey she had learned years ago from a disgraced scout she had secretly pardoned. The panel slammed shut, and the heavy door groaned open. Lisa stepped into a sprawling, smoke-filled cavern that operated as an illegal bazaar and neutral ground. It was chaotic, loud, and entirely unmonitored by the King's Beta network. Well, look what the storm washed in. Lisa turned to see Silas leaning against a concrete pillar. He was a rogue alpha, stripped of his pack years ago for challenging David's father. He was dangerous, opportunistic, and the best information broker in Oakhaven. "I need a secure room, Silas. Off the grid. No magic wards, no tech," Lisa said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline still vibrating in her veins. Silas pushed off the pillar, circling her slowly, his nose twitching. "You smell like ozone and fear, little human. But beneath that, I still smell him. Barely, but it's there." He stopped in front of her, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. "The Alpha King loses his prized pet. The bounty on your head is going to buy me a private island." Lisa didn't flinch. She reached into her duffel and pulled out a thick stack of unmarked bills, tossing them onto a nearby crate. 10,000 now. Another 10 when I leave. If you sell me to David, he won't pay you. He'll execute you for harboring me just on principle." Silas looked at the money, then back at her steel-gray eyes. The smirk faded. He respected logic, and he respected survival. "Room 4, he grunted, jerking his chin toward a dark corridor. "Don't cause trouble, or I'll throw you to the hounds myself." Lisa grabbed her bag and walked away, her spine rigid. She had bought herself time. But as she locked the heavy door of room 4 and finally sat on the edge of the lumpy mattress, the silence rushed in, and the crushing weight of her reality finally broke her. She pulled her knees to her chest, burying her face in her arms, and wept silently in the dark. The penthouse war room was a symphony of chaos. Holographic maps of Oakhaven flickered across the command table, overlaid with real-time tracking data and security feeds. 10 of the highest-ranking royal guards stood at attention, the tension in the room so thick it was suffocating. David stood at the head of the table, a towering figure of lethal stillness. The gold in his eyes hadn't faded. It burned with a terrifying, singular obsession. She has no vehicle, no known associates outside the pack, and her scent vanished at the perimeter gate. Marcus reported, his voice tight. "We found a forged passport. Elena Rostova, in a dumpster 3 miles east. Border control is on high alert." "It's a misdirection." David's voice was a low, terrifying rasp. He stared at the map, his mind working with brutal efficiency. "She's smarter than that. She knows we'd monitor the transit hubs." "Sire, with respect." Elder Thorne spoke up from the corner, his ancient voice laced with irritation. He was a pure-blood traditionalist, the very man David had been speaking to when Lisa overheard them. "The human has fled. Is this not an opportune moment?" The northern delegation arrives in... Before Thorne could finish, David crossed the room in a blur of violent motion. He didn't shift, but the sheer force of his dominant aura slammed Thorne against the wall. David's hand clamped around the elder's throat, lifting him inches off the floor. "If you ever refer to my mate as the human again..." David snarled, his fangs fully descended. I will rip your throat out and feed it to the northern delegation as an appetizer." "Do you understand me?" Thorne gasped, his face turning a mottled purple, and gave a frantic nod. David dropped him, disgusted. "I lied to you, Thorne." David addressed the room, his voice echoing with dangerous clarity. "The promise I made to strip her of her title was a deception. It was a strategic move to smoke out the northern assassins targeting her. My mate is my equal. She is the only Luna this pack will ever have." A stunned silence fell over the guard. Marcus's jaw tightened in sudden understanding. "She heard me," David confessed, the admission tasting like ash in his mouth. "She heard the lie, and she believed it. She thinks I am hunting her to discard her." He turned back to the map. The desperation was starting to bleed through his iron control. He needed to find her before she did something irreversible. He needed to look at her, hold her, and beg for her forgiveness until she believed him. "Where would she go?" Marcus asked quietly. "If she didn't leave the city." David stared at the sprawling grid of Oakhaven. His eyes traced the affluent districts, the packed territories, and finally settled on the dark, unmapped void beneath the industrial zone. "The Warrens. She's hiding where my authority is weakest," David said, a terrifying clarity settling over him. "She went into the underground." "Sire, the Warrens are a death trap for a human," Marcus warned. "Rogue factions, criminals." "She's not just human," David corrected, a grim pride mixing with his terror. "She's the Luna, and she's furious." He slammed his fist onto the holotable, shattering the image of the city. "Mobilize the elite unit. We are breaching the Warrens. If anyone touches a hair on her head, burn the entire underground to ash." Chapter 6. The Encounter. 3 days. Lisa had survived in the Warrens for 3 days, operating entirely on adrenaline, protein bars, and a ruthless commitment to her own logic. She had quickly realized that Silas's protection was flimsy. The bounty on her head had been broadcasted through the underground network within 24 hours. It wasn't just David hunting her now. It was every desperate rogue and bounty hunter in Oakhaven looking for a massive payday. She had to keep moving. Lisa navigated the labyrinthine tunnels of the Warrens with a stolen cloak pulled low over her face. She was searching for a smuggler named Jax, a contact who specialized in moving high-value targets across the ocean via black market cargo ships. She needed to get out of the country entirely. The air grew colder as she entered the lower levels, the walls slick with condensation and glowing moss. The distant rumble of the city above felt like a different world entirely. She rounded a sharp corner and froze. Standing 30 feet away, blocking the only exit to the smuggler's den, were 3 men. They didn't look like rogues. Their tactical gear was too clean, their posture too disciplined. They were Royal Guard trackers. They had infiltrated the Warrens. Panic flared, but Lisa instantly crushed it. She backed away slowly, hoping the shadows would conceal her retreat. Crack! Her boot shifted a loose piece of gravel. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the damp tunnel. All 3 trackers snapped their heads toward her. Their eyes flared a predatory silver. "Hold there!" The lead tracker shouted, reaching for the comms device at his shoulder. "Target located. Section 4, lower catacombs." Lisa didn't hesitate. She bolted. She knew these tunnels better than they did, having memorized a schematic map she bought from Silas. She sprinted down a narrow service corridor, her lungs burning, boots pounding against the wet stone. She could hear them behind her. Fast. Terrifyingly fast. They weren't running. They were hunting. She took a sharp left, vaulting over a rusted pipe, then ducked into a small alcove just as the trackers rushed past her original path. She held her breath. pressing herself flat against the cold stone, praying her suppressed scent wouldn't betray her. "Spread out," the leader commanded, his voice echoing down the corridor. She can't have gone far. The Alpha wants her alive and unharmed. Do not use force unless necessary. Unharmed. Lisa grimaced in the dark. So he can drag me back to the council and make a spectacle of stripping my mark himself. She waited until their footsteps faded, then slipped out of the alcove, moving in the opposite direction. She needed to find higher ground, a place where their numbers wouldn't matter. She hurried toward an abandoned pumping station she had noted on her map. It was a massive, cylindrical chamber with multiple catwalks and rusted machinery. If she could get to the upper levels, she could barricade herself until they moved on. She pushed through the heavy iron doors of the station, the hinges screaming in protest. The chamber was dark, save for the pale moonlight filtering through a grated skylight high above. Lisa began climbing the nearest rusted ladder, her hands slipping on the damp metal. She made it to the first catwalk, her heart hammering against her ribs. She was halfway to the second level when a sound stopped her cold. It wasn't a footstep. It wasn't a voice. It was a low, vibrational hum that seemed to resonate in the marrow of her bones. It was a sound she knew better than her own heartbeat. Slowly, she looked down at the floor of the pumping station. Standing in the center of the moonlight, looking up at her with eyes that burned like liquid gold, was David. He wasn't wearing his royal armor. He wore simple black tactical gear, his chest heaving, his face pale and drawn. He looked less like a king and more like a man who had been ripped apart and hastily stitched back together. For a long, terrible moment, neither of them moved. The silence between them was heavy, loaded with 3 years of love, 1 night of horrific betrayal, and the agonizing distance between a hunter and his prey. "Lisa," David said, his voice cracking, the single word echoing in the massive chamber. It wasn't a command. It was a plea. Lisa gripped the rusted railing, her knuckles white. She looked down at the man who had promised her the world, only to plot her destruction. "Don't," she whispered, her voice surprisingly steady, echoing back to him. "Don't you dare act like you're relieved. Don't you dare act like you're relieved." Lisa whispered, her voice slicing through the heavy, damp air of the pumping station. She took a step back on the rusted catwalk, her hand instinctively dropping to the heavy steel wrench she had scavenged hours earlier. David didn't move toward the ladder. He stood completely still, his chest rising and falling with ragged breaths. The golden light in his eyes flickered, warring with the profound human agony etched across his features. "I am relieved because you are breathing," David said, his voice dropping an octave, raw and jagged. "Because my chest hasn't stopped caving in since I found that collar on the glass, Lisa. Please, let me come up." "Stay exactly where you are," she commanded. It wasn't the plea of a terrified human. It was an order delivered with the cold, absolute authority of a Luna. David's jaw clenched, but he planted his boots firmly on the concrete. He respected the tone. He deserved it. "I heard you, David," Lisa said, the words tasting like copper in her mouth. "I stood outside those oak doors, holding a tray of your favorite tea, and I listened to you promise Elder Thorne that you would discard me. A fragile liability." That was the phrase, wasn't it? David squeezed his eyes shut, a visible tremor racking his massive frame. Hearing his own words thrown back at him, devoid of the strategic context, was a physical blow. When he opened his eyes, the gold was entirely gone, replaced by a dark, fathomless brown. "It was a lie," he said, his voice trembling with the force of his conviction. "Lisa, you have to look at me and know it was a lie. The northern purebloods aren't just displeased with our mating, they contracted assassins, They were going to use the winter solstice gala to murder you and frame a rogue faction. Lisa's grip on the railing tightened, her knuckles aching. She didn't interrupt. She let the silence demand more. If I openly declared war on the North without proof, the council would fracture. It would incite a civil war, and you would be caught in the crossfire. David continued, taking a single, agonizingly slow half-step forward. I needed Thorn and his spies to believe I was casting you aside. I needed them to drop their guard so my beta units could intercept the assassins and trace the gold back to the Northern Lords. It was a play, Lisa. A horrific, necessary play to keep you alive. Lisa stared down at him. The logic locked into place. It fit the political landscape. It fit David's ruthless, tactical mind. But the betrayal in her chest didn't vanish. It simply morphed. "And you didn't tell me," she said, her voice dropping to a dangerous, quiet register. "You orchestrated a performance that required my public humiliation, and you didn't trust me with the script. I was terrified." David confessed, the admission ripping out of him. The invincible Alpha King looked entirely broken under the pale moonlight. Lycan spies can smell a lie, Lisa. They can hear a shift in heartbeat. If you knew the truth, your scent wouldn't reflect the despair of a discarded mate. Thorn would have known. I needed your reaction to be flawless. So you broke my heart to make it look authentic. David flinched as if struck. I thought I had time. I was coming to our room to explain everything, but you were already gone. I survived 3 days in the Warrens, David. Lisa said, her voice vibrating with a sudden, fierce pride. I bypassed your biometric security, outsmarted your elite trackers, and negotiated with cutthroats. Do not ever look at me and tell me I am too fragile to hold a secret. David looked up at her, a profound, staggering awe breaking through his despair. He had spent 3 years trying to wrap her in bubble wrap, shielding her from the brutality of his world. He hadn't realized he was suffocating steel. You're right, he whispered. I was a fool. He finally took a step toward the ladder, raising his hands in surrender. Come down. Punish me. Make me sleep in the rain for a year, but please, let me take you home. The Warrens are... A low, guttural snarl echoed through the chamber, cutting David off. It didn't come from David. It came from the shadows high above Lisa. The air in the pumping station shifted instantly, the metallic tang of rust replaced by the suffocating, foul stench of stagnant blood and rotting pine. Northern purebloods. David's head snapped up, his eyes igniting into a blinding, predatory gold. The transformation was instantaneous and terrifying. His muscles expanded, tearing the seams of his tactical shirt as thick, obsidian claws erupted from his fingertips. A roar shook the very foundation of the building. Lisa, get down! David bellowed. 3 massive figures dropped from the upper grating, having bypassed the ground floor entirely. They hadn't tracked Lisa. They had tracked the Alpha King's frantic, reckless scent right to her. 2 of the assassins landed heavily on the ground floor, drawing serrated silver blades that glinted wickedly in the moonlight. The 3rd landed on the catwalk, only 10 feet away from Lisa. Adrenaline, cold and sharp, flooded Lisa's veins. She didn't scream. She didn't freeze. As the massive, gray-furred lichen lunged at her, jaws snapping toward her throat, Lisa dropped to her knees. She swung the heavy steel wrench with every ounce of strength she possessed, smashing it directly into the creature's kneecap. The bone shattered with a sickening crunch. The assassin howled, stumbling forward and missing her entirely, its momentum carrying it hard against the rusted railing. Below, the pumping station had turned into a slaughterhouse. David moved with a violent, terrifying grace. He didn't bother with weapons. He ducked under a silver blade, driving a clawed hand straight through the chest of the first attacker. He ripped his hand free, spinning immediately to catch the arm of the second assassin. But David was distracted. His eyes kept darting up to the catwalk, consumed by the need to ensure Lisa was safe. That microsecond of divided attention cost him. The second assassin twisted, driving a short, hidden silver dagger directly into David's side, slipping it right between his ribs. David roared in agony, the pure silver burning through his system like battery acid. He backhanded the attacker, sending the massive wolf flying across the room to crash against a concrete pillar, unconscious or dead. David dropped to one knee, a hand pressed to his bleeding side, his breathing ragged as the silver immediately began suppressing his healing factor. On the catwalk, Lisa's attacker recovered. Dragging his shattered leg, the gray wolf pulled a throwing knife from his belt, his yellow eyes locking onto the injured Alpha King below. He raised his arm, aiming for the back of David's neck. "Hey!" Lisa screamed. The wolf hesitated, glancing back. Lisa had scrambled backward to the main steam control valve she had noticed when she first climbed up. With a furious, desperate cry, she grabbed the red iron wheel and wrenched it open. A deafening hiss violently ruptured the air. A massive high-pressure jet of scalding, 200-degree industrial steam blasted directly out of the ruptured pipe beside the assassin. The wolf shrieked in agony as the steam cooked his flesh instantly. Blinded and thrashing, he lost his footing on the damp metal grating. He tumbled backward, flipping over the railing and plummeting 30 feet. He hit the concrete floor with a heavy, final thud, merely feet away from David. Silence slammed back into the chamber, broken only by the hiss of the dissipating steam and David's labored breathing. Lisa didn't wait. She scrambled down the ladder, her palms burning from sliding down the rusted iron rails. She hit the floor running, dropping to her knees beside David. "David," she gasped, her hands hovering over the dark blood soaking his side. The smell of searing silver was noxious. He looked at her, his golden eyes wide, chests heaving. He coughed, a terrible wet sound. You cooked him." "Shut up and let me see," she ordered, tearing the fabric of his shirt away. He caught her bloody, grease-stained hand, pressing it weakly against his chest. A fierce, bloody smile touched his lips. "My Luna." The silver dagger had missed his vital organs, but the proximity to his heart was slowing his supernatural recovery. Lisa used her tactical jacket to create a brutal, tight pressure bandage, her hands working with steady, unyielding focus. "You shouldn't have come down," David rasped, leaning his head back against the cold machinery. "You should have kept running to the surface, to safety." "Safety is an illusion," Lisa said sharply, tying off the makeshift bandage. She rocked back on her heels, meeting his gaze. "I ran because I thought I was a pawn. But if I'm your partner, then I fight where you fight." David stared at her, the last remnants of his archaic, protective instincts dissolving. He saw the grease on her cheek, the grim set of her jaw, and the absolute fire in her eyes. She wasn't a porcelain doll to be placed on a pedestal. She was a survivor. "I am sorry," David said, the words carrying the full weight of a king's submission. "I will never keep you in the dark again. I will never use your heart as a strategic advantage. You are my equal in all things, Lisa. If we go to war, we go together." Lisa looked at his bleeding side, then at the bodies of the northern assassins. The game had changed. The North had struck first, and they had missed. "We are already at war," Lisa corrected softly. Heavy, organized footsteps echoed from the entrance of the pumping station. Tactical flashlights cut through the gloom. Marcus and a dozen elite royal guards breached the room, their weapons drawn, eyes sweeping the carnage. Marcus stopped dead when he saw the 3 dead purebloods and the Alpha King bleeding on the floor. "Sire!" Marcus rushed forward, But David held up a hand, stopping his beta in his tracks. Slowly, agonizingly, David pushed himself to his feet. He swayed, the silver still burning in his veins. But he refused to fall. He reached out his hand to Lisa. She took it. He pulled her up, not tucking her behind him, but pulling her to stand perfectly shoulder to shoulder with him. "Secure the bodies," David commanded, his voice returning to the dark, lethal baritone of the Alpha King. "Extract the scent markers. I want the Northern Lords to know exactly whose blood is on this floor." Marcus bowed deeply. "Yes, sire. And the Luna?" David turned to Lisa. With his uninjured hand, he reached into his pocket. He pulled out the heavy platinum mating collar. He didn't attempt to put it on her. He simply held it out, resting it in the palm of his hand, offering her the choice. Lisa looked at the collar. It no longer looked like a leash. It looked like a promise. It looked like armor. She picked it up. With a swift, fluid motion, she wrapped it around her own neck, the heavy clasp clicking into place with a sound that echoed through the silent chamber. Instantly, the dormant mating bond in her chest flared back to life. A warm, rushing tide of absolute connection, wrapping around David's pain and offering him her strength. David closed his eyes, a ragged sigh of profound relief escaping his lips as he felt her presence flood his soul once more. "The Luna," Lisa said, turning to Marcus with a gaze as cold and unyielding as steel, "is going home. Tell the War Council to convene at dawn. We have a treaty to burn." They walked out of the warrens together, bleeding, bruised, but entirely unbreakable. The storm above had finally broken, leaving behind a cold, clear dawn, the perfect weather for a revolution. The dawn brought more than just sunlight to the city of Oakhaven. It brought the reign of a king who had learned his greatest strength, and a queen who had finally embraced her power. Lisa and David's journey through betrayal, survival, and ultimate trust proves that true partnership isn't about shielding one another from the dark. It's about holding a light and a weapon together.